Good afternoon, everyone. While people are floating in, I just wanted to go ahead and take care of some of the preliminaries before I introduce the speaker. Piece two of them. Today we have a team of people from Tier 2 training, and they're going to talk to us about breath and posture. But before we get started, I want to remind everyone that this series called Balanced Living happens on a quarterly basis. This is our second year, and we are graciously funded by the Cincinnati Bar Foundation, and specifically that's in conjunction with the Ken Jameson Health and Wellbeing Fund, which was established to support the committee. And if you are looking at end of the year contributions, it would be great to make those to the foundation in general and specifically to the Ken Jameson Fund. We have some upcoming events to tell you about. There is an Out of the Darkness Walk, which is at Sawyer Point on October the 19th. The Health and Wellbeing Committee is going to form a team to walk in the walk. The walk is a part of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and they have a Cincinnati chapter. I will be sending out an email with people with links if they would like to join in or donate. The committee is also planning a December 6th CLE focusing on mental health. Details about that will be forthcoming. And we are looking for topics for our final Balanced Living lecture. If you guys have things that you want to hear about, please fill out the comment section for today so that it can give us some guidance on what to do for our last lecture of this year and for next year. Today's presentation is called Just Breathe, which seems really simple, right? I mean, we do it every day. But however, when things get really, really, really stressful and you get frustrated, you can find your brain spinning and your pulse racing, and all of a sudden that breathing doesn't seem to work so well. So today we're going to learn about the use of breath and proper posture to help you control your body's responses to stressful situations and to help you be more productive and alert throughout your day. Our speakers today, as I said, are from Tier 2 training. Joe Hook is the Director of Performance Strategies. He provides all clients with knowledge and resources to enhance their performance. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Health and Human Performance at the University of Tennessee. He is a USAW Sports Performance Certified as well as the NSCA Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. He's worked with NFL, Major League Baseball, Olympic, and tactical athletes, as well as consulting various professional and amateur athletes, and was a 3-year starter in Division I college football. And he also works with normal people like us. So, and Jennifer Wright. Jennifer is just an amazing person, I think. She really came to our committee to give a presentation about what they do, her and Joe both. And they were so engaging that our whole committee monthly meeting was taken up talking to them. So she began her career at the Department of Defense. She also began a yoga practice shortly after 9/11 to use as a tool for wellness and stress relief. She has an interest in the ever-evolving connection between Eastern and Western therapies, and she focuses towards human performance and effectiveness. Her specific interests include nutraceuticals, personalized medicine, and human performance optimization. She holds an MBA concentrating in technology commercialization, specifically medical diagnostics. She's a registered yoga instructor, and she's the yoga therapist at the Mindful Yoga Therapy for Veterans, which is a part of the Veterans Court here in Hamilton County. She is a nutrition counselor and a Reiki practitioner. So now it's time for everybody to sit up, have good posture, and learn how to breathe.
And enjoy your lunch. Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you all for carving your time out of the day to be with us. It's great to be with you all. I want to take a moment to thank Tabitha, to thank Dimity and Gary as well, the rest of the Wellness Committee, for inviting us here today to talk about the couple topics that Joe and I really could talk about all day. Breath and posture. the fundamentals, the foundation of what we do in life. And although our presentation title states optimizing the attorney, really what we're doing, the skill sets that we are practicing and honing today are applicable to all areas of life, both professionally and personally. So that's something that we will get into a bit. Tabitha did a wonderful job introducing us, so we'll just get into it, get into our presentation. Just quickly, a show of hands, how many of you all had an opportunity to read our article in the CBA report? Awesome. Okay, great. Well, we will be reinforcing some of that, what we shared in the article, as well as getting into some of the little more depth.
Also want to make this, kind of informal. So if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to ask them. We'll save some time here at the end for some Q&A and also some applications. So we'll get to practice some of the stuff we're going to teach you today.
About 60% interactive dialogue, about 40% application, because we want to apply what we're talking about. Otherwise, what use is it? So Joe and I work with many populations. We work with the corporate wellness community. We work with our veterans community, tactical athlete, law enforcement. We work with general population. Joe does a great job with athletic enhancement performance with these professional athletes. But there's something that we see across these communities, and that is that we are continually living at a state of chronic stress and what that does on the body. So we bring these tools and techniques, both through breath and through posture, to enable these various communities to optimize their human, to think more clearly, to make better decisions, and overall just to live better.
So just to throw a couple words at you guys so we're kind of speaking more of a common language. There's two words that are generally used as quantification kind of words when it comes to the field that we're talking about right here. First and foremost, you have human performance, which we view as more of an acute kind of quantification method. So if you think about human performance, you're usually thinking about how I'm performing right now at this specific point in time. So if you look at this graph right here on the bottom, you see performance is that kind of squiggly line. It's going all over the place. And it's kind of like an expression of your inner physiology, of your nervous system, of your anatomy, just kind of like your whole entire human being and how it's affecting other people in the right now. And then we have wellness, which is obviously a word that is used very frequently. Everybody's got a wellness program. And we're looking at the long-term sustainability of wellness. So these two kind of share the symbiotic relationship. We're really talking about the same thing. Wellness is more of that long-term resiliency. It's kind of a quantification of your human performance over time. So we have that more straight line effect right there. And what we want to do is improve both, obviously, right? We can't improve your wellness without improving your human performance. So we have different techniques that not only improve our performance right now, but how to kind of reuptake, so to speak, how to get on that higher level more consistently over time. And those two factors work together to create something that we quantify as quality of life, right? And we're all kind of more geared towards improving our quality of life. And there's some basic quantification methods of those, two of which are my favorite is output and happiness, right? Those are two things that really can define our lives to ourselves. So these are kind of the words that we're looking to use today and to kind of become acclimated to and improve over time. So the first piece of this, and kind of when we look at all these problems, and human beings, everybody's like, oh my God, the standard of living is going, all the way down. And there's all these different factors that go out there. Obviously, food quality and all these different things all have a very pivotal and important role in a reduced kind of quality of life standard. But the first and foremost thing that Jen and I look at is our natural motor development. And I think we can all agree that in today's world, there's kind of a lack thereof, if you will. Right? We go through this really anomaly process as a little infant. We start rocking around and we really kind of explore our body. We kind of build up this core stability. We learn how to breathe. We start rolling over. We learn how to stand up and crawl and move around our environment. And that's awesome. And in today's world, in our more Western culture, what we do from day one is kind of throw shoes on you, right? Because they look good. And they look so cute on your little infants. Oh my gosh, those little baby shoes. But these shoes we know don't go to a tailor and we don't kind of get them specifically designed for your child's little foot, you'd lose all your money if you did that. Don't do that. Just let your kids walk around barefoot just a little bit. So we kind of put these shoes on these kids, and then all of a sudden, it doesn't seem like it's that much, but why is your kid crying every single time you put on the shoes and they want to take them off and throw them and throw a fit? It's really because we're kind of wedging this foot into this really weird position, right? These shoes are one size fits all, and we know that human beings are never one size fits all. So we put this foot into the shoe, we kind of cram it in there, and I went to a really interesting conference one time where a guy named Mark Verstegen spoke at, and he is highly touted as one of the best human performance specialists in the world. I had the pleasure of working for his organization, Exos, which is revered as the global leader in performance training. And what Mark talked about was barefoot training. And it's kind of like this new sexy thing on the market. Everybody's got their minimalist shoes, and then there was the reaction by the APA, the American Podiatry Association, where they're like, oh my gosh, minimalist shoes, there's no proof that they improve your lower leg stability. And we were all like, oh my God, how could it not? It's only logical. But exactly. So what's happened kind of is we put these people's feet in shoes, we didn't take into account, what would the long-term effects be? What would the overall wellness effects be to this human being? And we found that very westernized people have kind of this shovel-looking foot right here. So it's kind of like it's shaped like this, and then it kind of curves in on the toes. And what's happening is as our foot kind of slides towards the front of the shoe, we start developing and adapting to this position. So our feet are shaped more like this. Well, he showed up on the screen these cadavers of Aborigines. And not only were their feet massive, I mean, these things were big. They're big and muscular. They were ugly. Oh my God, they're ugly as sin. But they were really, it was really kind of this really interesting thing to see this big strapping foot in this perfectly shaped triangle. The big toe was all in line with the heel cord. So was the pinky toe. And you could assume that, hey, people probably in these Aboriginal tribes had control of every single toe individually. And I can't control every single toe individually. I don't know about you guys, because my feet are adapted to the shoe-like shuffle position. It drives me nuts. But we have those kind of things to deal with in today's world where that's happening. Also, everything in your body is kind of connected through something called myofascial meridians. And so if we tore back your skin, we wouldn't see like, oh, there's my bicep and there's my tricep or something like that. We'd see like this one muscle that was rolling along all the way down to your feet, all the way up to the top of your head. And that's why sometimes something as basic as a shoe that elevates the heel slightly can affect your overall posture. So what we found is pretty much every shoe that we put on our feet has a slightly elevated heel from the toe position, and the ramifications of that are enormous. You have something called your superficial back line that runs from your plantar fascia. I mean, how many people in here have ever had plantar fasciitis or heard of someone who has plantar fasciitis? What happens is that plantar fascia runs up to something called your heel cord. And when we elevate that heel, we start shortening up that heel cord. So everything's kind of thrown off in the foot. The significance of that is, hey, this thing's running all the way up from my heel, through my calf, through my hamstring, through my lower back, to the base of my skull. And all of a sudden, I've kind of taken a seesaw and put a kink in it to one side. Well, my body is the ever-adapting thing. It's always going to find a way to survive. So it's not going to fall over. What it's going to do is it's going to throw weight back to the other side of the seesaw. And so we wind up in something that looks more like this or this. It's what we call extension dominance on the left and flexion dominance on the right. And all you're really seeing right here, anatomically speaking, is a counterbalance, right? So something was thrown off and then something immediately counterbalanced it. Well, that caused something else to move and this to move and this to move. And it's very, very important to understand that these two positions are incredibly impactful on not only your physical well-being, but your psychological well-being. You have this thing called the autonomic nervous system, right? And we know it as the fight or flight or rest or digest response. So we're talking about sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. And immediately, and stress by definition is simply an activation of the sympathetic nervous system, of the fight or flight response. Certainly has its functional functionality purposes, but in today's world we find that we're spending a lot of time over here in the sympathetic nervous system, not a whole lot of time over here in the parasympathetic nervous system. And part of that has to do with the fact that we're not giving ourselves a chance to ever kind of get to that parasympathetic nervous system. So My parasympathetic nervous system is actually housed down in here, right? We know it's responsible for digestion and some of those kind of functions. And my sympathetic nervous system is housed up here, right? Because if immediately I get into a fight right now, my heart rate's got to elevate. My physiology has to heighten, so to speak. And when I kind of put a little kink into the hose, so to speak, by kind of bringing that forward head on neck or that chin forward, all of a sudden I start compressing my central nervous system. It becomes really hard to send a signal all the way down to my parasympathetic nervous system. So structurally, we're saying we can't get to that parasympathetic nervous system. And that could simply be because of shoes. Or it could be due to the fact that after you were about, I don't know, age of 5, we brought you into school. And then we sat you down at a desk. And I know that's kind of like the big thing in today's world, like sitting is the new smoking, and it's absolutely true. The reason why they say that isn't because, like, we have this kind of false conception of you're sitting down in a chair, so you're sedentary. You're not moving right now. Well, you are moving. You're always moving. If you're alive, you're moving because your heart beating is a movement pattern. Your breathing is a movement pattern. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But sitting is absolutely a movement pattern, and it's a really poor movement pattern. I know everybody's like sitting up in their chair now. But it's kind of like a really poor squat. If you think about sitting in a really poor squat, how hard is it for your tissues to maintain those positions? And the pelvis isn't like this square that just sits perfectly on this chair right here and just kind of hangs out. It's actually like this kind of like triangular, more kind of pointy structure right there that's really hard to balance. And not only that, I have a hip joint right here where inside this hip socket, my femur, this bone right here, can actually move. It's called translation. And when I go to move, for example, if I go to hip extension right here with something called internal rotation, this bone actually moves forward in the socket. What happens is if I'm sitting for a majority of my day, my body says, oh, new paradigm. This is how I'm living, so I got to adapt to this position. And it starts kind of solidifying some of these tissues into more weird positions. So you see this one a lot right here. And this could simply be because, hey, I sit down in this position a majority of the day. And what's happening is some tissues are really shortening in response. Some are lengthening but stiffening up because they're constantly being relied upon to provide tension. And then you have the opposite of that, like, oh, I know this is bad, so I need to crank back the other way. And what happens is I wind up going into extension dominance instead of that neutral spine over there to the right because my hip flexors, you have a muscle called your psoas that attaches your lower back down to the femur right here, and all of a sudden it starts pulling to try to get you to a more upright position. And because my core, my deep core didn't stabilize my spine, all of a sudden my spine shot forward too, and I wound up in extension dominance, both of which are going to activate your sympathetic nervous system and really, really take away from quality of life. I mean, back problems are an $100 billion a year problem, and I would estimate about 90% of them are preventable if we just look at this right here. So if you can see kind of on these lines, we're looking for something where the middle of your ear lines up with the middle of your foot right here, and everything seems to fall along that line. Right here in extension dominance, you can see that my pelvis is tilted forward right here. We call that anterior pelvic tilt. That means I'm moving at one vertebral segment right here instead of dissociating or moving my trunk from my bones right here, my femurs. We have flexion dominance right there, which is kind of like this timid posture right here where I'm kind of forward. Or if I've been sitting for a long time and I've adapted more of this position, you're going to see really, really what we call stiff rib cages with that. So like you have muscles in between your ribs. They get really stiff. Shannon works out at tier 2, not to call you out. But we always hit these mobility drills called like 90-90 sweeps where we're taking your ribs through big ranges of motion, because if this is stiff, I can't do this, which means my shoulder can't really function the way it's supposed to. And all of a sudden, I start sacrificing right here to do some of my more functional purposes. Maybe it's lifting a plate up onto a shelf, and all of a sudden, I just tore my labrum lifting a plate up onto a shelf, and that's not cool. You need to have something a better story if you get injured than that. And then over here on the right, we have this neutral posture where the ear is aligning down to the foot right there. What you're really seeing, and the point that we're going to drive home, this is why Jen and I believe, make a good team, is because breath and posture are literally the same thing. So what we're seeing right here on these two is compensatory breathing patterns. Compensatory meaning altered breathing patterns. They're not using their more efficient version of breathing, which you can see I have the ability to do over here to the right. Instead, I'm using what's called compensatory breathing muscles right here. The pec minor, this guy, this is a really, really commonly used one. And you see the guys who have been bench pressing a lot, or a lot of people just walking around in everyday life, kind of like this. This is actually a compensatory breathing pattern. This muscle right here is helping me create breath. And then we have what we call hypertonicity. In muscles right here, you have something called your sternocleidomastoid. I know it's a mouthful. And your scalenes that are running down here through the neck. You see all this tension right there. Why is that? It's because it's helping me create breathing. Or maybe you have a little underbite and your teeth grind. And what's the reason for that? It's a compensatory breathing and postural pattern. So breath helps us reinforce this neutral position right here. And that's why we're very excited to kind of deliver these breath techniques and postural techniques. They work together, so you can't have one without the other. So we want to think about that in the upcoming bits of our presentation.
So as Joe indicated, posture is derived from and impacted by the breath. But also, our breath is a movement pattern. It's a movement pattern that we do 20,000 times a day. So if, indicated in that CBA report, if we bench press or if we squat 20,000 times a day incorrectly, we're going to really impact and injure the body. Similarly, when we breathe incorrectly, if we don't breathe shallowly, we're missing out on a result that could be easily achieved if we just practice these breath techniques to access our lowest lobe, to fill that lowest lobe where 60% of our oxygen is absorbed, and also really activate this parasympathetic nervous system. So I included this awesome diagram of the body of the head because it's important to breathe through the nose. And we all know, as you guys are finishing up your lunch, we know that digestion begins in the mouth and respiration begins in the nose. So we'll make a point to not confuse the two. In our culture, many of us do breathe through the mouth. And what's happening there is we're activating the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, where we might experience either hyperventilation or just anxiety by breathing through the mouth. I don't even like demonstrating it. So, okay. So the nasal breath is so important. So just, Joe and I love science. Science is the root of all we do. So given my background, our backgrounds too, I'll get a little geeky here. We have 12 cranial nerves that come down. There are 12 pairs. 5 of those pairs are responsible for controlling our breath. When we breathe through the nose, I can only show it on one, there are 3 nasal turbines that are in our nasal cavities. They act just as a wind turbine. So when we inhale through our nose, we are sending the oxygen across those turbines, which is stimulating the cranial nerves or activating them. Those cranial nerves are telling the hypothalamus, got to do your job now. The hypothalamus tells the medulla to control the rate of breath, control the rate of oxygen and how it is sent throughout the body. The hypothalamus also connects with the pons, which smooths the breath. From an engineering terms, we have turbulent flow of air, real rigid. We have laminar flow, real smooth. And the bottom line is when we smooth our breath, we can smooth our mind. We can smooth those thoughts. And we're going to leave a bit of time to talk about some of the devices that we use to quantify that, because it is important to us that we can quantify how, when we breathe, we are activating, we are controlling the heart rate variability, the breaths per minute equate to all sorts of things like cognitive ability, cognitive function. So back to nasal breath and why it's just so much better than mouth breath. In addition to nasal breath enabling us to relax, the nasal breath also helps us to control cognitive function, make better decisions in general, and ultimately we just feel better. So Joe indicated earlier that our parasympathetic nervous system is really activated down in this area, which is where our lowest lobe is located. Our top lobe is where our lungs connect with our windpipe. And so when we breathe and access the deepest lobe, we're really able to start smoothing the brain. We teach a lot of this to our law enforcement guys, and gals, because it is so important for us all to make good decisions, sound decisions, but also to deregulate, or downregulate, not deregulate, downregulate, and to de-stress. So, carrying on to posturing and how that's important, Joe?
So this is one of my favorite things to talk about to you guys, because your job is all about perspective, right? And really, when we are moving, not only are we trying to get from A to B or kind of live our lives, we're also communicating. In fact, I think sometimes people forget that before, I think it's estimated to be about 150,000 years ago, where someone actually had a deformation of a windpipe and spoke, or some crazy story like that, because the first function of the throat is not to actually speak. We actually communicated non-verbally. And I love to talk about this, because there's this whole entire crazy science behind why a majority of us are right-handed, because of anatomical weight and this kind of evolutionary purpose of everybody signing off of one hand. It's crazy, but that would be a whole nother hour in itself. But basically, the whole big thing is, nonverbal communication is movement, right? And we're always trying to send a signal to somebody. And there's these guys out on the West Coast that I like to look at. They do something called the art of charm. It's not what it sounds like. They train in certain areas it probably is, but one of their clients is the United States military, and they work with special forces operators. This guy's got this really unique story of he was kidnapped 3 times in his life, and he used some of these techniques to get out of situations. But he teaches these guys how to basically gain control of a situation and gain rapport with other people via nonverbal communication. And you want to know what the #1 cue that they threw out to people was? They're saying, hey, when you enter into a room, you're immediately on someone's radar, so that's your first impression with them. And when you come in and you have this really bad posture, immediately, or your hands are in your pocket, you're sending some sort of signal right there. You're immediately sending some sort of signal of maybe apprehension or self-consciousness. They say come into the door with a nice long spine with the same cues that we're going to use today, and smile. And they say you become that blip on the radar, you make a very positive impact. And I just thought, oh man, how awesome.
We change the electromagnetic frequency.
Exactly. So, we're changing the space between maybe me and Jen right here if I get a long spine and we speak. Anybody seen the movie Rise of the Planet of the Apes? I think that's what the name of it is. When you see Caesar, he's going into create this big kind of powerful alpha male position. He just elongates his spine and gets really tall. And we see animals do that out in nature all the time. They posture up. And what we're really saying is, hey, I'm aligning my physiology right here, and I'm relaxed. If I'm in this bad posture and I'm breathing, there's probably some sort of subconscious level kind of pickup of your breathing rate and kind of how stressed you are as well. I don't have any science behind me to back that up. But, if that's the case, I can tell you're stressed. If you're up here like so, you're not really stressed, and you're really showing me a very dominant posture, a very upright posture. It's also what we teach for a de-escalation posture in our tactical units. So in martial arts, oftentimes we talk about coming up and protecting the face. And really what we're looking at is flexion right here. And this is a bracing mechanism. And oftentimes I hear in the weight room, people are like, brace the core and squeeze the butt. And that's a great cue if you have someone who is very extension dominant and their back starts flaring up. Sometimes that can take away some pain. But you never want to take that and ingrain that as a movement pattern, because that's a compensatory movement pattern. That's something we call gripping. That's alternating my breath. The only time I really want to use that is when I'm trying to defend my internal organs. So if someone's trying to punch me in the stomach, obviously it makes sense that I brace up and protect that. The opposite of that is extension dominance, where I'm kind of hanging out on the meat. So I kind of relax everything and fall forward, and I find tension by exploring that. It's kind of like this overly compensatory pattern. You see guys, I love when people show me pictures of people in Planet Fitness, and they talk about what's going on in Planet Fitness when there isn't a movement coach, because I love it, I dig it. It's all the psychology that's actually happening there. You're seeing people walk around like this, and it's extension dominance, it's compensatory breathing patterns. Then you have guys who are maybe more like this, and they're going to do deadlifts, and they're kind of bending at the back, and they're putting all this pressure on their lower back. Really what they're failing to do is communicate, right? We don't want to ever be in those positions, especially under load. We just don't know what they are because we didn't develop this locomotive kind of natural progression with that. And also, there's not very many models for that around you. You know, you don't just walk down the street any day, or nowadays, and see people with outstanding posture. Like, that would really kind of grabs you if you see someone with a great walking gait and a great posture. And that's because posture is communication.
I'd like to add to that. I mean, we spend a lot of our time observing posture, but for many of us that don't have as much awareness as we built, because it's our job, all of us recognize it. We know it when we see it. There is a sensation, an awareness of that when we observe someone that's walking tall, walking strong. There's a presence, and I think that's the term that we use in society, is that there is a presence. And there's a lot more behind it. There's a lot more science, but I think we can identify that collectively as presence. Should we get into the seated postures? And since a lot of our audience spend time like us in chairs and cars.
Absolutely. So we'll run through some basic posture kind of patterns right here, just especially since you find yourself sitting, and obviously right now, but a majority of us find ourselves sitting throughout the day. And like I said, we usually tell people in the corporate world, if you can manage getting up every 20 to 30 minutes, do it, because this is a really, really hard position to maintain. Like I said, we're kind of teeter-tottering back and forth on this pelvis, which is a really, really hard structure to maintain good stability on. But we can really certainly be in better positions than we normally find ourselves in. So what I'll invite everybody to do is kind of take the back off of the back of this chair right here. And let's get those feet straight ahead and really try to generate some sort of connection with the ground. I know it's kind of hard right here because you don't want to find yourself up here in a squat all day and actually really actively working this all day, but you want to find a place too where you can create some sort of force off of the ground, because that helps maintain stability up the chain. This is the basic cue that we're going to give you all day. I know it sounds so simple and so easy. This is the number one mechanism that I use when I get stressed out. It should be the number one mechanism that you use when you get stressed out after this point. You want to imagine there's a string attaching from the crown of your head right here all the way to the bottom of your butt, or where your tailbone is. And what we're going to do is we're going to imagine someone pulling that string along from both sides right here.
You may even try that yourself. Imaginary string.
And you can
or
kind
grab
of
a hair.
You can kind of feel something, it's a little subtle shift where all this stuff kind of gets in a line. Jen uses a cue when we're standing up. You'll feel sand in your back pockets, and I like that because if you're in extension dominance in particular, it's going to drag that pelvis down and get you back to a more neutral position. But you should immediately feel it's something different. Maybe not better, but different about this position when you get into it. And you might look around and notice people around you, how much different they look when they're in a nice, good, tall posture, right? And so Jen will lead us through a breathing exercise out of this position to help us reinforce this nice, tall posture.
Let's do it. So we have our left lung and our right lung. The left lung has 2 lobes, the right has 3. So we're already off balance, right? Asymmetrical. Our whole body is asymmetrical by the placement of our organs, etc., and our postural dominance on one side. But for purposes of this exercise, we're going to segment the lungs into 3 sections: the top, the mid, and the low lungs. Our lungs are about the size of a football. They extend from up by our clavicle all the way down by our belly button diaphragm. So I'm going to invite you all to simply sit in this posture and bring awareness to your breath. Notice the quality and texture. Remember that turbulent or laminar flow. Bring awareness to your breath. How does it feel? Notice it without judgment. It just is. Your breath is your own. So the awareness that we bring to it, again, I just invite you to bring awareness to it without judgment. And then invite you to bring your hands to your lowest lobe here, the low lung. Physiologically speaking, and because of my slide, we know that breath begins in the nose. So let's inhale through the nose. Breathe into this lowest lobe where 60% of the oxygen is absorbed. We know we're breathing into this low lobe because we can feel a gentle rise and fall in our hands. It might be subtle, Might be strong. So we inhale through the nose, expanding the low belly, the low lung. Good. Next, we're going to take the hands and cross them over the chest near the mid-lung section. So our hands are about, just underneath the armpits, thereabouts, here at the mid-lung. We're going to inhale through the nose and still originate breath through the low lung, but bring it up here to the mid-lung where we feel the movements a lot different. We breathe into the mid-lung, feel the expansion of our rib cage into our hands. And if we have a connection to the back of our seat, we may feel that there is a deeper, firmer connection to the back of the seat, the chair, here at the mid-lung. Lastly, we'll take our fingertips and just place them up by our clavicle, by the collarbone where the lungs begin. Inhaling again, originating breath from the low lung to mid to upper lung. And then exhale in your natural rhythm of breath. Continue that motion going. Inhale low to mid to upper. Movement here is again subtle. And on your next exhale, we can just drop our hands by our side and take a moment to notice how you feel. Notice how you feel by inviting in that fresh oxygen, reacquainting ourselves with the full lung function, the fullest lung function that we have available and accessible to us today. That is the 3-part lung breath. It is we could do a lung breath or a breath seminar alone that lasts for hours, but that's the technique that we start with because many of us just have not found that function of breathing into our lowest lobe. So that is the 3-part lung breath. I'm looking for the slide advancer. Yeah. Thank you.
So what's great about this is, even if we're working with a professional athlete, when we get them in and say that we're doing something, a basic exercise that requires basically a nice stable posture, which is any movement that we do. Let's say we're doing an overhead press. What we'll usually see is the tendency, especially for those guys, to go overhead if they have a bias towards one of these postural patterns that are what we would deem as less efficient. If they were extension dominant, let's say, as they pressed up overhead, immediately what would happen is they're in a compensatory posture, and their compensatory posture worsens because they're going up overhead and they're actually challenging posture. What we'll kind of tell people to do, and this is something to do for you guys that are active, is if you're doing something to inhale through the nose and develop a lot of pressure down here, right? Because we get a lot of air. What happens is we create a lot of pressure in this area. It's called your thoracopelvic canister right here. And it helps stabilize your lower back. So you guys that have lower back pains and stuff like that, this is a great, great exercise to do to reinforce good posture. And when we get people into good postural patterns, get them breathing and helping them kind of control their spine down here, all of a sudden they can go up overhead without changing or deviating this posture, which is really, really good. It's really, really effective tool. And that's the basics of life that are going to get them to an improved performance on the field. Similarly here, it's the basics of movement right here that are going to provide you the skills to communicate and to control your situations. I suggest practicing this 24/7 because there's never a moment where you don't have to breathe.
And there's another breath practice that we're going to move right into that is really soothing for the nervous system. It's a breath technique that in yoga is called the Ujjayi breath. And it means conquering, victorious breath. And the reason why it's named that in Sanskrit is because it's conquering the spiraling thoughts. When we're working, our brain stays active. We want it to be active. We want to utilize it, maintain that cognitive function. But as much as we need to utilize the brain, rarely are we told that we also need to rest it in order to re-up, really. So this breath technique that we have, the Ujjayi breath, we're going to practice it for about 2 minutes, but we're going to walk you through it. It's pretty simple. And we're going to learn it in 3 parts. So I like to pretend you have an imaginary mirror here. You can whip out your mirror if you wish. And as we inhale through the nose, we're going to exhale like we're fogging the mirror. Let's do that again. You can feel the constriction in the back of the throat. That's the constriction on the glottis. We're going to maintain that constriction as we inhale again. Exhale, closing the mouth halfway through our exhale, like this. Can you hear that oceany quality of breath? It's like Darth Vader. Darth Vader was just really relaxing the whole time. That's the secret behind the mask. Let's do this together again, inhaling through the nose. Exhale. You may hear your neighbor too. That's the Ujjayi breath, the oceany quality of breath. Lastly, we arrive at a place where we can inhale through the nose and just exhale with a closed mouth, constriction on the glottis. This breath can be done forcefully and strongly or smoothly. We'll focus on the latter, just creating smooth, even breaths. Again, smoothing the breath, smoothing the mind. So let's practice that together. Inhaling and exhaling at your own pace. Your breath is your own. I invite you to close your eyes if it feels comfortable, or just soften them. You all had a wonderful speaker on meditation, Dr. Sears. Our breath is a technique that helps us to meditate as well. An expert in the field of human performance, Tim Ferriss, said that as he meditated, he felt his mind was like a caged monkey on meth. Powerful image. Very powerful image. This breath is one, when we're focusing on the breath, it's very challenging to focus on anything else. Breath helps to keep us in the here and in the now, but it also, as we're inhaling through the nose, we're starting to trigger our brain to think more clearly, work more smoothly. All right. Take a moment to notice how you feel. Slowly blink open your eyes. Come back to the room. This is the Ujjayi breath, and we can use it as we are walking, talking at the grocery store, waiting in line, reading. It's something that it gives us energy when we need it, and it's very accessible. It's something we also teach in breath walk. We're walking to and from court. We're walking around the building. We're walking wherever we're walking. With coordinating our breath with our movement is important as well, just for a little more synchronicity. So we'll teach you one. Actually, we'll just share this food for thought as you're walking around, maybe back to your office today, to coordinate your breath with your walk. So for each step we take, we inhale. And we're going to do this for 4. We're going on a 4x4 count. So we're going to inhale for 4 and exhale for 4. And that's a simple breath technique. 4 inhales, 4 exhales, smooth, even, that really builds that mental clarity. That is the purpose of that breath practice, is mental clarity.
And also what that does, this is one of my dirty little secrets. My mother tore her meniscus walking. Oh my gosh. And to think I was in the house. No, I didn't know these techniques at the time. What that also helps you do is, again, better out your movement pattern right there, which is a walking gait. Doesn't seem like a whole lot, but how many people do we see walk with duck feet right here, or something similar, or flip the foot out? And actually walking with duck feet is just a telltale sign that I have a compensatory breathing pattern right here, because your diaphragm actually shares common connection points with a muscle behind your tibia called your posterior tibialis. And the whole goal of the posterior tibialis, the whole function of it, is to help provide support to your arch. So if I'm not breathing correctly, I'm collapsing or pronating my arches. And if you ever gone to the doctor and they're like, you have flat feet, like, oh, you were just born with it. It's actually not a congenital disorder. It's actually a compensatory breathing pattern. It's just a motor pattern. It can be fixed very easily. And I mean, like, I kid you not, there are NFL teams right now that will screen you for, it's called navicular bone drop. And the navicular bone's located about right here. It's kind of next to the arch. And if it's a certain degree off or kind of lowered, what they'll do is they'll red flag it and say, he's at risk for knee injury. which is, totally legit because you are. ACL tears, that's the mechanic for ACL tear, is when your knee comes in, your meniscal tears, your MCL tears, and really your just natural, I think, what people would consider tendonitis in the knee, patellar tendonitis, which is just a blanket term for I have knee pain. And really what this does is it just wreaks havoc on your entire body. You see all the time, I have clients that have chronic migraine headaches, and chronic migraines, might just be the result of all of this off-axis loading that's occurring right here at the bottom of your neck and compression of your central nervous system down here at the first junction of your brain stem to your spinal cord.
Will you speak to that a little
absolutely
plainly about the forward head-on neck,
Totally.
what we see sitting
So
at
sitting
the
at the computer, oh my gosh, it's almost like we just got into a room and said, what is the worst thing we can do for human beings? Let's create this typing mechanism that almost, because you have to sit down to get to it, let's go ahead and kind of roll ourselves into this position right here. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody else in this room. I'll be sitting down writing, I'll just be like, oh my God, Joe, what are you doing? And it's usually when I start feeling like I'm crashing. I notice, oh my gosh, my posture is horrendous right now. And that's because I'm slumped over here. And what I'm really doing is I'm slacking out, again, finding tension on these tissues by slacking out other ones. I'm kind of rolling forward. And because of that, I kind of have this counterbalance. Imagine if I had just like two 45-pound weights on a rope right here, and I just placed it on my back. All of a sudden, my spinal kind of integrity would be altered. Things would be different. My spine would change because it's adapting to that position. But the problem is I'm really, really lengthening out these tissues. See this all the time. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, my upper back, my shoulder, everything's killing me, right? And that's just because we're killing these tissues. We're relying upon them to do the job of the whole entire trunk right here and my lungs and my diaphragm to help me create breath. And so not only do we have that, we also are compressing, like I said, the C1 suboccipital kind of, which is basically the base of your skull. Sorry if I get a little bit termy. Compression right here. But also what else is happening is there's off-axis loading that's occurring in these tissues. The temple is a good one. Everybody's like, oh, I'm stressed. Or I've been sitting here at the desk, and what do? I want to rub these two areas just like this. It's kind of like the go-to, right? Well, that's your temporomandibular joint, and I don't know if anybody's ever heard of TMJD, temporomandibular joint disorder. Very, very painful. People have clenched teeth and can't bite, and that's the result of just simply off-axis loading. It's just like if my foot was turned out and my knee was caving in. That's happening at the jaw, and it's
so
very, very painful.
So how do we tackle that in the chair, especially if
Absolutely.
we're sitting at the desk?
So this is a good one because this is just kind of like an added detail. If we pulled Jen's spine nice and long, got her shoulders in a relaxed position, that we weren't cranking back like this. But I think this is a great cue that Jen uses. You kind of inhale your shoulders up and then exhale them back into a relaxed position right here. We want to really fight being over top like this, but we don't want to wind up cranking back because you're not going to type like this. That doesn't make any sense. Although I have seen split keyboards like that, and that's pretty cool. But what we really want to do is get this chin back here on a line. And you'll see this, I think, oftentimes with people with the underbite. It's kind of like if I put everything into a good position and I've ingrained it up here, this is my postural pattern. How do I get back to that nasty position down here? I'll start doing is reaching up here or trying to compress this area by getting like this. And really what we want to do, right, is take all that pressure off of that position. So we say kind of push the chin back. Imagine if someone's going to smack you right here, immediately you'd realign and brace into this good position. I also tell people who have problems with the jaw, there's a multitude of factors that go into that. There's soft tissue work that can really make your life a whole lot better as it kind of relates to the jaw. But a basic cue that provides really good stability to the jaw is if you said the word thin and held the end. Or you could say duh and let your kind of jaw hang like a hammock in between two trees, so to speak.
Let's try that now.
Mm-hmm. So pull ourselves up tall. Imagine someone's going to come smack you in the face. So you just get everything aligned right here. I know it feels weird. We call this packing the chin in the weight room. And then we'll just say thin. And hold that tongue on the roof of your mouth. Relax the jaw. And all of a sudden you found yourself in a very supported position right here. It kind of feels weird to hold that out. Yeah, exactly.
This is great in the car, too.
Absolutely. This is my go-to in the car. I start getting mad. Traffic's my thing. Like, traffic's like the thing that just drives me nuts. Even though I understand, like, I don't have like this Truman Show syndrome thing we call it, where like the world revolves around me, like get out of my way. But you know, we kind of find ourselves in traffic. I get anxious. I just need to be moving if I'm on the road, and just sometimes I find myself applying this breath technique, right? Because immediately it'll be chin forward. I'm looking forward, like I think I'm looking forward or looking for something. Really, what I'm trying to do is get into this really stressful position to kind of heighten my physiology and add to that stressful response. Really, what we want to do is down-regulate, get into that neutral environment. So I think this is a perfect lead into how do we apply this? When do we use this? We put down here game day prep. Obviously, with our background working with athletes, this is like the number one thing I see people screw up all the time. It's like, we're in the locker room, we're blasting all this crazy, stressful music. We go out to this high-stress environment, we're yelling in the weight room, so it's like stress, 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 and all of a sudden you crash. That's why you see like,
because it's exhausting.
Huge, exactly.
Stress is exhausting on the neurochemicals.
Enormous momentum swings all throughout the game. And it could literally be avoided by, you know, not heightening up the beginning of the game so much. Like, it's great for the opening kickoff, and then what? You know, all of a sudden the team scores on you, and because you've been up here, boom, you hit the rock bottom area. Similarly to you guys, right? You're preparing yourself. You're going out and speaking in front of people. This is, you know, what we did today. How do we prepare to come in and speak to people? It's not by kind of getting riled up. It's not by getting excited, so to speak. I mean, we're excited, but we have to maintain balance of that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. What happens if, you know, you're in court and then all of a sudden something doesn't go the way that you anticipated it would?
Or a client doesn't go as
starts
anticipated.
freaking out. Oh my gosh, I can only imagine, you know. How do we maintain, right? Because you're trying to manage perception here, and all of a sudden things are kind of getting out of control, and it can kind of become this really frustrating, oh my God, the world's out of my hands kind of thing. Just breathe, right? We want to get back up into that good position, posture up, you know, communicate, and breathe. And that can have such a powerful impact on not just the way other people are behaving, but the way that you're behaving.
Well, because we mimic each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the, so if there's someone, if you want to manipulate the environment, positively manipulate the environment, we emulate it, we demonstrate it in the hope that it will be reflected.
Mm-hmm. So then we also have entering into the radar, right? We become the blip on someone's radar the moment we walk into the room. Long spine, smile on the face, welcoming, right? We're trying to own the situation. So these are very big confidence positions right there. So just imagine someone's pulling that string nice and long. Walk in with that tall, neutral spine with a smile on your face. Send the message, you know, and enter in on the good note and have that good first impression every day. That's something you can practice walking in through every door. I've been doing that. It hasn't gone so well for me. But you can do better than I have. We also have the prior to the docket, you know, with the client. Again, you know, these are kind of like what we consider training the trainer opportunities, where we teach you how to do these things, you practice them, and then use them with other people.
Use them with your clients.
Absolutely.
And if they're, or your colleagues, if we're just in a stressful situation, we need to suggest to our clients, friends, family, just to take a breath. Not like this. We want to take a nice, smooth breath. And so we now know a little bit more about why this is important. We don't need to give them an hour's worth of seminar of why, but we can impact the outcome.
Especially if you have someone who's high profile or high risk, you know, and you have to manage the situation. Again, what people are going to do is look at the perception of what's going on. And if that person's in a very stressed position, they start acting really stressed and get really spiraled out of control, it's not going to look good for you, obviously. So these are things that I would, if I was you, I would definitely consider every time I was briefing somebody before we went into court, because these are very, very important things.
Absolutely. And we covered a lot of the lifestyle throughout our presentation at the desk, our mock desk, and at home. Again, all of these principles can be applied in the professional setting as well as at home. In fact, it's important to, because practice does make perfect. These are just techniques. The practice is in here for the real world out there, and that's why we take time every day. It would be ideal just to hone our skills.
I think it's important here to talk about also the lifestyle kind of habits and choices. You know, again, breaking patterns that we get into, because if we're trying to get into that high performance environment, There's obvious ones that we talk about all the time is instead of grabbing the nightcap, we're using a breath practice, using a meditation practice to help us go to sleep at night, because it's going to affect your sleep quality. It's going to affect you for days afterwards. Actually, a recent study came out by a guy named Dave Asprey, who has something called Bulletproof Radio. If any of you guys are into podcasts, it's a great thing to follow. And he's just obsessed with human performance, and I love it. But he did a recent study on how long alcohol can affect you. And I love a drink just as much as the next person, so I'm not saying don't ever drink in your entire life. But just understand the ramifications for your performance over the next 3 days. If you have one of these things, it can affect your performance short term, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you have something big coming up, I'd suggest taking something or taking an alternate route, because that alcohol is shown to affect you cognitively for the next 4 days. 4 days, and I think it was something like 3 drinks could affect you for 4 days. That's unbelievable.
A lot of that is due to sugars and to genetically modified foods, the crops that our wheat and barley and corn are made from. But the result is that there's a huge impact on the brain. The other thing, working with our veterans populations that often suffer from co-occurring disorders, substance abuse, there are a couple of breath practices that we do, and love to get into them perhaps another time. But going to sleep, because it is so important to sleep, to rest our brain, rest our body. If you find yourself that spiraling mind, utilize that Ujjayi breath and then transition. The left nostril is related to the right hemisphere, and the right nostril is related to the left. And the left nostril is specifically related to the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you're having trouble sleeping at night, just bring your awareness to your left nostril. It may or may not work great for you, but it's a tool that we can utilize. It is because of those cranial nerves. Even if our nostril is stuffed up for environmental reasons, deviated septums, who knows, our pure awareness is activating that nerve. And so that's something that reduces the anxiety a little bit. Like, I can't access it. No problem. Just bring your awareness there on that left nostril to help sleep a little more deeply.
And another one with sleep, if that one doesn't work for you, that one works for me really well, and I enjoy using that one. If it doesn't work well for you, there's also other ways to downregulate other than just breathing. So I oftentimes, yes, exactly, posturally, and also from just external kind of feedback cues. One of the ways to downregulate is actually through palpation. So we know this is like, hey, you don't get up off the massage table and want to go hit the weights hard, right? You want to go to sleep. You want to relax. And the reason is because if I kind of start massaging myself or rubbing myself, I oftentimes tell people, having trouble going to sleep, go ahead and get on the foam roller and really relax and roll through some of your tissues right there. Because that will kind of hit an off switch to your nervous system. It's saying, okay, time to relax. I need to let this kind of manipulate the tissues right here.
Okay.
Just like massaging or a foam roller or something like that. Just touch. Foam roller.
It's about this long. It's made of foam. It's solid core foam.
It could really be anything. If you have a rolling pin, I mean, literally anything. If you have a spouse and they just can rub on your arm, that'll literally put you to sleep. It's crazy, and it's kind of like how the mother kind of puts the child to sleep, right? Palpation. There's also the little trick. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of mothers kind of turning the pelvis slightly above the head and putting this. If you have an extension dominant person, I always tell them to put a bolster beneath their legs. So does Jen during meditation. The reason is because if I'm hyperextended, again, I'm not breathing well. So if I put a bolster beneath the hips or the knees or something that puts that pelvis at a little bit of an elevated tilt right there, it could wind up providing a neutral spine to us. So just a couple little tricks for you to use at night if you find that, hey, I have trouble sleeping. And that's usually what we find in people that have heightened sympathetic nervous systems. Is trouble sleeping. One of the biggest indicators of heightened stress is trouble sleeping.
And we want to be mindful of your time. And
I would just at this point like to let anyone that has questions just give them like 5 minutes. And then if you have anything else, you can come up to, I'm sure Janet and Joe will stick around for a little bit.
Absolutely.
We will.
So
Absolutely.
If there are any questions now that you feel comfortable letting everyone share with? I just thought of one thing. You know, as a lawyer, as a female lawyer particularly, I have opted to just wear shoes that are comfortable and fit my feet correctly. But there's a lot of pressure to look like a lawyer, right?
Absolutely.
So I wanted to know, and it might be for men as well, how important are the shoes that you wear on a daily basis?
Wow,
for your posture?
What a great question. I love that question because it's one of the things, right? What is the purpose of high heels in women? And it's really funny because they
look great, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's to bolster appearance, right? And so what winds up happening is if I get into this compensatory pattern right here, the biggest thing with high heels isn't that you're really elevated right here. I mean, it is, but you kind of don't have the surface to really press off of the ground. You're kind of inactively in this position. So what winds up happening is we're slacking out and finding a position based off of that slack. And what it does is it provides heightened tonality to your quads and to your calves and these things. They're really working really hard to give you some stability up top. Also, you'll see with everybody who's wearing high heels is either extension dominance. This is probably the most common one, and this is what they're going for in high heels, in my opinion, because it bolsters up the chest a little bit, right? I mean, it kind of gets me out here to this position. You might see some flexion dominance with that as well, but it's kind of really hard to maintain that. If you notice this, when I see women in high heels oftentimes go up to sit down on a chair, you'll see like this, like really like unbelievably crazy looking squat. Really, it's not like a squat like this, just a simple sitting down. And that's like, if we put a weight in your hand and had you squat like that, I'd vomit a little bit because I know that's going to tear your meniscus, But the biggest thing with that, again, is that communication piece. I would always recommend for your health and well-being wearing something more flat. However, I do understand there are social norms out there, and there's a lot of pressure to do that. If you wind up in a situation where you're in high heels, I would try to unload myself from a standing position as much as possible because of those factors, and we don't want to wind up here for hours, and I think it's really uncomfortable for women. I usually found that when I was, when I go out with women in high heels, for example, they want to take their shoes off and carry them places, and I'm like, oh, what was the purpose of wearing shoes? But
so we
I
encourage that, though.
Yes, absolutely.
And the desk, if you can kick them off underneath the desk, I found that wedges, I mean, pretty much even my flat shoes have an elevated heel. All of them do,
totally.
Right? So about 4 millimeters or more. Men's, women's shoes, it really doesn't matter. Our heels are all elevated. So wedges seem to be a little bit more comfortable, just generally speaking, and it provides us a little bit more ankle support. But I'm with you, maintaining the professional as a female, that professional, it feels good, But to balance that, I really recommend balancing it with flats, not getting into that pattern where we are creating those patterns over and over and over again.
Interesting point, just kind of a little fun fact. When people pass out at weddings, and they're just standing up there like that, what that is because they have an elevated heel and they're hyperextending their knees, and your body works on something called the skeletal muscle pump to help pump out blood, and something called lymph, which is the aftermath of swelling. And when we don't have that skeletal muscle pump to help pump the blood, it pools, and then all of a sudden we pass out from a lack of blood to the brain. So that's why I would suggest going unloaded for a majority of the time that you are wearing elevated heels. Yeah, men's shoes certainly have elevated heels. These do, but not nearly like, if you're wearing the 6-inch pumps, I mean, good luck. But try to get into it.